talking about remembering, reminding, and how forgetful I am. But before we do that, let's jump into some scripture. This is Mark 9:38 through 41. It says, "Teacher," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he was not one of us." So let's just hold right there. Corey goes away for 1 week and gives me a demon passage to carry on. Honestly, I'm so part-time here, I don't get paid enough to talk about demons. So we're going to skip that for this week. I'm just going to tell you it's weird. Sometimes it's just helpful to have a pastor be like, that's weird. That's in there. Anyway, do not stop him, Jesus said, for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. And whoever is not against us is for us. Truly, I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward. So a lot of this is just being about like if you're not, like, they're not against us, right? And we're in a time right now, I love the Dodgers, like all of that, like the LA is coming together in that way. Because right now we really are in a time where it's precarious, right? Like it's stressful, like there are people against me, and it feels like that in a really, really big way. I'm the recovery pastor here, which naturally means I'm in recovery. So that'll come up a lot during this, and I just want to make sure everyone knows that. So I'm in recovery. But basically, when I'm at a party nowadays, which is an uncomfortable position for me always, but it used to be too because I'm a pastor as well, and that was my full-time gig while I was an alcoholic. So when I'm at a party, usually it used to be, what do you do for a living? And I would tell people like, oh, I'm a pastor, and that would either shut people down, and they'd be like, okay, see ya, and that was great for this introvert. Or the other thing would happen where they'd be like, I want to tell you everything about my Jesus life, and you'd be like, oh no, we're stuck here. Now, a lot of people kind of know my story and stuff, and so a lot of times it'll just come up. But I was at this kid's birthday party with my family, not alone, and one of the dads, he's a family friend. They're moving to like Idaho, and we're in the mix, and there's like a bubble person starting, and so everyone's staring at these bubbles, and I'm just trying to have a good time, look at the bubbles, and I hear sort of in the corner of my ear, I go, hey man, and I go, what? And it's him, and he goes, so I did it. And I went, did it? What are you talking about? And he goes, I quit drinking. And I'm like, this is during bubbles? Okay, let's have this conversation right now. And I was like, awesome, man. Are you like working a program, anything like that? And he goes, no, man, no, that's not for me. And I went, oh, okay, cool, dude. And this is where we get to the not against us, not for all that kind of stuff. Because so often in recovery, like AA is sort of looked upon as like, if you're not in AA, God help you, right? Like there's no other way that you are possibly going to get sober, right? Which is true in some senses for me and myself. Like that's a program that I work and I love and all of that. But it's not always the way. And really what it comes down to is what you love more. So my uncle, I promise we'll get back to Bubbles and the guy who stopped drinking, but my uncle is an alpaca farmer in upstate New York. I've never met this uncle. So my dad grew up in a very alcoholic family. My grandfather was a country western singer, and kind of, very verbally abusive, all that good stuff. And so my dad's family kind of spread out all over the country. And so I have a whole bunch of relatives with the last name Cobia that I have never met. When Facebook came out, it was just like this barrage of like, I didn't know I had these relatives. But my Uncle Jimmy, my dad always talked about as like, well, Jimmy's got problems. That was the only thing that I would ever hear from my Southern Baptist father. It turns out my Uncle Jimmy has 30 years of recovery, which is insane. Yeah. And my dad and him hadn't talked in like 10 years. And when I was really, really going through my stuff, I'm on my like third or fourth rehab, relapses are happening all the time. My dad's in a low place and he just doesn't know if I'm gonna live, to be honest. He calls up my Uncle Jimmy and they talk for the first time in like a decade. And he's like, can I just ask you some questions about Josh and like what's going on? And he gives him the whole kind of big, huge sob story. And my Uncle Jimmy at the end just very calmly goes like, I think Josh is gonna be okay. And he goes, why? And he goes, well, he just has to find something that he loves more than drinking, and he'll be okay. And to my dad, I think that was maybe like a slight throwaway line, but my dad gave me that line. And when I heard that line, I was like, oh my God, that's it. Like, I do. I have to find something that I love more than this thing, because this is entrenched in every aspect of my life, and I really have to do the work of finding out, like, what do I like now? Like, what do I like to do, right? So back to the bubbles and this guy who stopped drinking. there's two ways. There's a bridge here, or a fork in the road. There's two ways that this could go. One, he just starts drinking as soon as he moves to Idaho, and I kind of knew that in the back of my head. And then the other way is like, and it's usually, if you find something you love more, it usually comes in the form of like a very weird, but very niche and very like hyper-focused hobby, right? And that's really what we find. Like, we love that thing, and it's awesome. And so it's been like 6 or 7 months, and I forget about this conversation happening, and then we get a Christmas card in the mail. And it's from this family. And I'm like, oh, man, I haven't thought about that guy. I wonder if he's doing okay, like that kind of a thing. I should have checked it on, all those Christian guilt things are popping up. But I look on the back of the card, and it's like the family, and it's the classic sort of like they had a photographer maybe from their church who took a picture of them on a beach, all that good stuff. They're all wearing matching turtlenecks. And then on the other side, you turn it around, and he is in full beekeeping garb, like with a huge like hive. And I was like, son of a gun, that guy stayed sober. Like, it was a really cool moment to go like, oh, he found something that he loved more, right? And that's kind of the thing, like in this moment in Mark, and we've been going through the book of Mark now for almost like a calendar year. Like, Corey came up to me after the last service. He's like, if you can't do anything with that demons passage, man, I'm really sick of Mark. But we're in it. And at this point, like the last 3 weeks, there's just this common theme that I've noticed in the disciples with Jesus, which is that they're forgetful, right? If you all were here, and the way that New Abbey works is like, you probably weren't, but like 2 or 3 weeks ago, Corey was talking about this other passage where they're trying to get a demon out of someone, and then they can't, and so they go to Jesus, and they're like, how did you do that? And we weren't able to. And he's like, this kind only comes out through prayer, right? Which is really funny to me, because I'm like, you didn't try prayer. Like, that's the first thing on the list. But he says that, and then the disciples kind of learn. And then, so the thing there is, like, just 2 chapters ago, they don't know how to do this, right? And now we're in chapter 9, and they're rebuking somebody else who's actually doing it. They're just not doing it, like, in their club and in their gang. And so they tell Jesus, like, no, we stopped that guy. Like, thank goodness, right? Because he's not a part of us. And Jesus goes, what are you doing, right? Don't stop him. Don't rebuke him. Like, he's doing the right thing. He's bringing healing to the world. And anybody who does that, we're not going to hold that back, right? And what's beautiful about that line, don't stop them, this is where we get to the remembrance and the remembering, the reminders, and all that good stuff, is that's actually what's called a remez. Everyone say remez for me? Okay. It's a beautiful Hebrew word, and basically it just means like a hint or a reminder. It's this really cool mechanism in Scripture that when we see it, it's like built in, and it's really intelligent, and it's really smart. It basically mirrors something that happened way earlier, either in Scripture or in a story that these disciples would have known. And the phrase that he uses really in like the Hebrew is like, don't forbid them. And as soon as he says that, it's like a common phrase that they would have learned in their version of like Sunday school, which would have been following a rabbi around, and they would have gone, oh, because that's a story about Joshua and Moses, and Joshua tries to shut down other people who were prophesying in his name, and Moses says, what are you doing? Don't shut down people who are prophesying. Like, let them do what they're going to do. Don't forbid them. And so in this moment, Jesus is offering this remez, and it's like this kind of like explosion in their brain. My favorite version of this, I learned this from a comedian friend. My favorite modern remez is this. But besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Does everyone get that, right? It just kind of pops this story up where you go, oh, right? It's like a magic trick. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's offering this magic trick to them to remind them of this bigger part of the story. Another fun remez is when Jesus is asked, how many times should I forgive someone? Is it 7? Is it 70 times 7? And some biblical translations will actually like add that number, which I can't do the fast math right now, but it would be 70 times 7. But the actual fun translation is 77. 77 times. And if you look at that, you're like, why does it say 77? And it turns out, like, way earlier in the story, which is something these people would have known, there's a guy named Lamech. And Lamech is he's a descendant of Cain, which is the first murderer, and he kind of follows that family line. And he's talking about getting revenge on someone. And he says, if anybody comes to my house, I will have revenge on them, not 7 times, but 77 times. Right? And so what Jesus is saying in that beautiful moment is, I want you to forgive like someone would want revenge. I want that kind of fervor in you for forgiveness. It's not about a number. It's about a mindset. I want you to forgive like that, right? And that's one of those magic tricks, right? It's just this thing that reminds us of something else. And in AA, we have this saying that goes, I go to bed with a leaky head, which means I can learn all of this stuff. I can have these huge epiphanies during the day, and as soon as my head hits the pillow, it all leaks out, like right there, right? And I need a daily reminder of who I am and who loves me. A daily reminder. And that's actually the word for religion at its best. Religio means to reconnect, to re-ligament. It means that when we come into a space like this, we remind each other of who we are, of what I believe, of who I truly am. And we need that reminder like all the time, not just once a week. Neil Brennan, another comedian, has this awesome thing. And he's doing this, by the way, in the context of doing ayahuasca once a year, which as a person in recovery, I can't recommend, but if you're not, I can. He's talking about this in that context, but he says, like, I need this yearly reminder for myself, and it helps keep me fresh in all other aspects of my life. And then he starts talking about, like, how, like, Islamic people pray. And he's like, 5 times a day. Like, that seems about right? Because I forget who I am. And then he made this point that I thought was so beautiful. I grew up in Amsterdam when I was a kid, and when you walk around the streets of Amsterdam, there are all these old churches. Like, literally on every corner, there are these old, sort of vacant churches. And he's like, why are there churches on every corner and every block? And he said, because that's about the time it takes for me to go into one of those spaces, have a huge religious experience, then come out and walk a block and start getting in my own shit, right? Like, oh my God, and then getting to the end of that block and going, oh yeah, now I remember, right? It's a reminder. It's a daily reminder. Anne Lamott talks about this. Her pastor friend is in Marin City, another place that I grew up, says that he gets up every week to remind people of their inherent, irrefutable, irreversible belovedness. And then he does the same thing the next Sunday because that's about how long it takes for people to forget, right? So that's the reason we come to these spaces, is because we go out, we forget, and then we come back. And that's what the disciples are doing here. They're testing the water, they're going out, and then Jesus has to just gently pull them back. But you'll notice, like, Jesus is not rebuking them or calling them dumb or anything like that in this. All he's doing is just gently reminding them and using a tool like a remez that's a gentle thing that says, like, I want you to discover this for yourself. I'm going to give you this, like, half a line, and then I want you to have that epiphany. Because when we discover something versus learning something, when we discover it, we never lose it, right? And so they're having this self-discovery and this moment of awakening. When I was getting sober and, like, trying to get sober, one of the key things that I learned was meditation. I would climb up to the roof at the sober house that I lived in, because the sober house was like a frat house without alcohol, which is just a wild experience. And I needed, like, some peace, and there was this little stairway that would go up to the top of this building, and you could see the ocean from up there, and it was really calm up there. And it was just a place of refuge for me. Like, nobody ever wanted, it wasn't like it was a secret, like, passageway and only I could find it. Like, anybody could come up there at any point, but nobody did, right? And so it was like this moment that I would have to myself, and I was like, I think this is a place that I could kind of learn to get quiet with myself, because that's something that I had really never done. And so I began to get quiet with myself, and I would spend like 10 minutes of silence out there, just like my eyes open, just staring ahead, because my eyes closed, all these regrets would come in, all these, like, awful thoughts would come in. And what I learned is, like, the most peaceful that I would get was not in a perfect, quote unquote, meditation session, where I was just sort of like humming 3 inches off the roof there. It was more in the times where, like, my brain would go to these really, really awful memories, and then I would breathe and I would pull myself back to center. And then my brain would go off to this other really awful memory, and then I would breathe and I would, like, bring myself back to center. Or I would say something like, God, would you bring me back to center? And then I would find myself right there in the middle again. And what I found out is that that's actually true. Sharon Salzberg is this awesome meditation teacher, talks about the only clinical benefit of meditation is when we go off the path, we discover we've been distracted, and then we remember and we come back to center. That actually builds new neural pathways. That's the whole mechanism. And I think how we do anything is how we do everything. And so if that's true in that little sense, that's probably true in life. That when I go out and I go away and then I come back, that's actually a really powerful way of knowing myself, of knowing God, of knowing all of it, right? In that sense, this is actually, it's a wild Sunday for me to be up here. This is 5 years, almost exactly to the date, of when my life kind of completely unraveled. I won't get into the whole big long story and trauma dump on you, but basically, I preached drunk. So I showed up, and it's weird being in this space in the Elysian. I was just having this conversation with friends of mine who went to that church, because this is a lot like that space. It was in Santa Monica. It had a bar in the front, just like this, and I would walk in early in the morning, terrified, because I'd be so hungover and I'd be sweating and I'd be shaking, and I would take like 2 shots of whatever was on the bar, and that would help me like hold my iPad while I was preaching or hold the mic so I wasn't like this. And this particular morning, I had drinking a little bit more than that, and I got up, and it went terribly. Like thank God, I don't remember like a lot of it. Actually, in my head, I was like, I understand that people got angry, but not half bad in terms of a sermon. But like really, it was probably pretty bad. There were people walking out, and at the end of it, I left that space so mad at myself, so angry. I had just come back. Like, my church had given me 90 days to figure it out, and I had gone to 2 rehabs in that time. I checked into a sober living in that time, and like 3 days before this sermon, I started drinking again. And I realized in that moment, I was like, I have no way to control this. This is like way bigger than me, and I can't figure it out. Like, I personally wasn't a lot different than I am now. Like, I was a nice person. I was like, I loved people. I loved what I did. I really cared about people. I cared about this. I cared about the idea of Jesus. I thought that was really powerful, and yet I could not get rid of this thing. I'll never forget, right after that, I left. I went to my garage in Santa Monica, threw open the door, thought I was completely alone, and went for my little stash bottle. It wasn't a little stash bottle. It was a Kirkland Signature brand bottle of vodka, which I called a Kirk Sig. But I would grab that, and I threw it way over my head. And it was this huge glass bottle, and I remember that visual so clearly of just like the glass like a foot over my head. And then I hear a truck roll in, and it's the head of the board of this church that I was at. And he gets out of the car, and he just sees me like pull down the bottle. And he goes, "Man, what's going on?" And I was like, "Dude, I don't know. I don't know how to fix this at all. Like, I have no clue." And that started this really long journey of genuine recovery, because that was the first time I was really honest with someone where I was like, I need to quit. I can't keep doing this. I can't take another 90 days. I can't be a pastor. Like, I just need to figure out whatever's going on in my soul, in my heart, and I need to take the time to do that. And so I gave him my resignation. Now, what's really funny about that is, like, 2 days later, I forgot that I had resigned. And so, like, reminder, right, come back to the center. And he was like, "No, we accept your resignation." And I was like, "What are you talking?" Oh, that was real? Okay. But coming back to the center, right, that was my first moment of, like, really feeling myself in the center again. I think when we are out, whatever that version of out is for you, and there is a version of that. Because if you're in this space, if you're in this room in Los Angeles in 2024, you've recovered from something. Somebody's hurt you in some way. You've come back to center. You're in a space like this on this weekend. That's a really big deal. And so when we're out, whatever that means for us, we're living in this kind of dissonance. There's this constant anxiety, this constant pain, this constant hum of, I'm not where I need to be, and I need to find myself back in the center. And that's what's so beautiful about God and my understanding of God now, is that God leaves these little living remezes in our life and reminds us that I'm here too, and that you're not alone in this, and that the center is actually me. And the more you embrace me, the more you will be in that center, and the more you'll experience peace, the more you'll experience rest. And the more I come back to that peace and that rest, it keeps me from something that looks a lot like despair. And I'll end with this story. A couple of weeks ago, I work in Santa Monica now, and I actually, full circle story, all that good stuff. I work in treatment centers now, and I'm a spiritual director there. And so I sit with people and I help them figure out their spiritual identity. And that sounds like a weird job, but I do it kind of all over Malibu and then in an IOP. And I sit with people from like 9 to 5, hour to hour to hour to hour to hour, just talking with people about their faith and what that means. And if they don't have faith, what does that mean? And it's amazing. Like, it's a beautiful, beautiful job and a beautiful life. But certain things haven't changed. Like we still live in our house in Woodland Hills that my father-in-law owns, and that causes me dissonance, and I still drive a car that causes me dissonance. All that stuff is still true, right? And so I'm sitting in Bagel Nosh, which is in Santa Monica. Shout out to Bagel Nosh. If you're there, go there and study. That's like a temple for me. But anyway, I'm writing and journaling, and I'm writing all about despair. My favorite definition of despair is not this like, oh, woe is me attitude. My favorite definition of despair, and I don't know where I got this, and I would give credit, it's not mine, but it's the idea that like every day is gonna look exactly the same. That today is gonna look just like tomorrow, that tomorrow just looks like yesterday, that I'm never getting out of this pattern. That's what despair feels like. And so I'm writing about despair and how I feel like I'm in this pattern, I can't get out, and like life doesn't really feel that much different, even though there's like, anyway, like everything's different, but in my mind and in myself, I'm in a moment where I'm like, nothing feels different, like, you know, and I'm writing and I'm angry and I'm doing all this stuff, and I go up to get another cup of coffee, and I go to the front, and I see this guy, and he's got this big fro, and his name is Theo, and I know Theo. I don't know Theo from Bagel Nosh, I know Theo from a sober living that I was at like 3 years ago. And Theo and I were in a 6-man room together, and he was on the far end of the room, and I was over here near the door. There was one moldy bathroom in this room. You got to know people really well. What's really funny about this is Theo had no idea who I was. So I was like, hey, man. And he goes, hey, what can I get you? And I was like, okay, Theo doesn't remember who I am. But I got a cup of coffee, and then I came back, and I remembered, like, when I was in that sober living with Theo, the biggest thing that was going on with him was, like, I can't hold down a job. I'm trying all that I can do, but every time I get a job, like I'll use and I'll lose that job, or I just do something, I disrupt something, and it gets taken from me. And he was like the manager of this Bagel Nosh. Like he was like running the place. And I kind of sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, like Theo's life looks completely different than it did 3 years ago. And honestly, I'm sitting in this Bagel Nosh, journaling, writing about a day where I'm going to sit with people all day long and talk about faith and talk about recovery, and my life looks completely different too. And despair has no place in that kind of conversation. So yeah, this might be 5 years to the date of me preaching drunk. It's also my daughter Grace's birthday next week. And they're just really cool reminders like that, little hidden remezes in the world that like pop up and remind me that like, wow, not only are you loved, but there's a bigger love. So with that, I want you to get back in your groups and I want you to talk about this. What do you need to be reminded of?